Hey everybody, this is the new experimental tank I've set up. I'm trying to determine whether or not I can establish a denitrifying cycle with a deep gravel bed. We've got about 5 inches of sand and gravel in this tank. We'll talk more about that in a few moments. I do want to talk about my specific goals for this tank. A lot of people seem to be confused about what I'm trying to do here, so we are going to talk about that in just a moment. But first, I have scaped the tank out, more or less. This is as simple as it's going to be. I have three fairly large rocks in there. The one on the left is pretty significant, and they are all just sort of buried down into the sand and gravel and are just sort of supported in that way. They're not really propped up against anything. They're all freestanding, and it's just a little bit of visual appeal for me, and it does give the fish a little sense of cover. There's some shady areas where they can go to get out of the light and that sort of thing. The fish you can see all huddled in the top corner, I was hoping would spread out and swim around a little more if I put some food in the tank. This is the first time these fish have ever experienced flake fish food. They were still living in the river this morning. I did shoot some video footage of being out there and trying to catch them, but the river was a little bit flooded from all the rain we had last night, and the water was all murky. But I did manage to catch, I believe it's 24 of them, and I will give you at least a little look at where they came from, so you'll get to see the habitat that they actually were in when I collected them this morning. So you can see they were in shallow, grassy, water where the waters were a little higher than normal, and they were up where the grass and the weeds and stuff were. So they're fish that definitely like to be undercover and in a secure area. I don't want them just swimming around in a completely bare, open tank. But at the same time, I do want this tank to function the exact same as it would function if I had any other fish tank. So effectively, this is a 10-gallon tank with a bunch of little guppies swimming around in it, and that's going to serve the purposes for my experiment. And all I'm trying to do with this tank is to establish whether or not you can develop a deep bad denitrifying cycle in an aquarium. That's it. That's the only thing I'm trying to establish. I know a lot of you are saying, well, of course you can. But there's a lot of people out there that say you can't. And there's some science out there that says you can't, or at least indicates or suggests that the denitrifying bacteria, the anaerobic bacteria that lives deep down in the substrate, it suggests that can't live in the home aquarium. I believe it can. My own experience seems to indicate it can, but the other tanks I've got set up that seem to be denitrifying themselves also have other components that may factor in. They have plants growing in them, or they have exposed, oxygenated, flowing water that's flowing over rocks and woodwork. I have lots of woodwork in some of the tanks, and these other variables may be what's factoring into why I never seem to develop nitrate in these other tanks. So this tank is set up with nothing in it but gravel. It's got some rocks. They're not going to change anything except the way the water flows around the tank a little bit, but they're not going to absorb nitrate the way wood might or the way plants might or something. They're just rocks. So rocks and gravel are the only thing that are going in this tank. I've got about 5 inches of sandy gravel, and we're going to have a medium stocking density with the amount of fish in here. These are, most of them are fairly young and small. They will grow up to be, fairly full size, full guppy size fish. So I may even have to thin that out a little bit if all of them survive. A few of them look like they're a little bit beat up from either just being out in the wild, or maybe they've got some disease on them or something like that. So we'll see how many of these actually survive. Again, I only caught them just a few hours ago, and they've been in the tank. So we're going to keep an eye on all the parameters to make sure that the nitrogen cycle is fully functioning. I'm not going to do what I did last time and just assume everything is okay. So we're going to make sure the fish are fine. Now, the last thing I will say about this tank is My goal is to set it up as simplistically as possible. This is supposed to replicate the idea of a very new beginner fish keeper setting up their first aquarium, but instead of putting the 1 inch of gravel and the hang on the back filter in the back, what if you put 5 inches of gravel and a hang on the back filter on the back? Would that set up a denitrifying cycle? As simple as that, just gravel and to hang on the back filter. Would that set up a denitrifying cycle? So already I can hear your argument that, first of all, this is river gravel and it's natural sandy gravel. It's not the same stuff you'd buy in a bag at the Walmart or your local pet store or whatever. And that's a fair enough argument. We will discuss that as time goes on. That's something I've considered. I honestly did this because I can't afford right now to go out and buy bags of gravel to put in the tank. I'm just broke. And this was free. I went to the river and I scooped it up myself. The other argument you could make is that since I collected this naturally, it may already have denitrifying bacteria living on it since I brought it from a river. The idea that denitrifying bacteria exists is not the question. We know that that process happens. Can it happen in a home aquarium is the question. So if I've brought this stuff home, isn't that kind of already sort of ruining the experiment right out of the gate? And I say no, it's not, because even if I brought the stuff home, if it survives in the fish tank, then that means it can survive in a fish tank. And if it can survive in a fish tank, then it'll survive in your fish tank too. You don't have to bring it home from the river to get it in your fish tank. If it can survive in the fish tank is all I'm trying to find out. So the fact that I brought home some sort of pre-charged gravel, some living gravel, which again, for as oxygenated as it got and for as rinsed off as it was, and for as many times as I've done water change and stirred that gravel over, I would say that if there was any anaerobic bacteria living on it when I brought it in, I probably killed all that stuff off. We're probably sort of starting from scratch when it comes to that anyway. So this is basically a tank that's got sandy gravel and some fish in it, and that is it. And we are going to see if that alone will be able to set up a denitrifying cycle. If it does, we can go on from there. I can experiment with different things. We can try layering and putting sand on the bottom and gravel on the top or whatever. Right now, I'm just going for super simplistic. Let's see if this works. If it does, we'll move to the next step. So make sure you're subscribed and you won't miss what's going on with this tank as we move forward or anything else. Hope that video wasn't too boring. I know there's not a lot to look at in this tank, but that's the way it's going to be for a little while. So thanks again for watching. Make sure you're subscribed, and I will see you real soon in the next one.